Hello and welcome to the Animal Zone with Professor Monzon. Today we continue exploring the diversity of animal life. In this video we focus on the mammals. We will begin by talking about about what is a mammal, and then we'll talk about the origin and evolution of mammals. Then we'll discuss some structural and functional adaptations of the mammals, focusing on things that grow out of mammal skin. Then we'll briefly talk about human domestication of other mammals, and then in another lecture I will focus on human evolution. Okay, first, what is a mammal? Similar to last video where I asked what is a bird. Okay, what is a mammal? It really comes down to one thing. A mammal is a hairy animal. Just like birds are the only animals that have feathers, mammals are the only animals that have hair. So the single unique feature that distinguishes mammals from all other animals is their hair. Now, there are other things that mammals possess. Uh, in addition to hair, mammals have specialized teeth and jaws for feeding on a variety of foods. The other vertebrate groups that we've seen before, like the fishes and the amphibians and the reptiles, their teeth tend to all be the same, and mammals have specialized teeth, right? So, for example, we have molars, we have canines, we have incisors. That condition is called heterodont teeth, right? Hetero means other, dont means teeth. So we have heterodont teeth, meaning our teeth are not all the same. Mammals also have innovations in the middle ear bones for transmitting sounds. So other classes of vertebrates have hearing, but the way that mammals hear is unique in that we use bones, little tiny bones in our inside of our ears that transmit sounds, and then those vibrations get converted into neural stimuli. Mammals also have mammary glands. In fact, this could also be mentioned as the single unique characteristics that makes mammals mammals. In fact, that is where the name of the group comes from, because we have mammary glands for nourishing young with milk. Mammals also have an intrauterine vascular placenta. Well, most of them. Uh, most mammals have a placenta. There are other mammals that are called monotremes. They are oviparous, meaning they lay eggs, and there are also the marsupials. Mammals have a large brain with a neocortex. This is larger compared to, relatively larger, right? Larger relative to their body size compared to other groups of vertebrates. Mammals have a diaphragm for efficient ventilation of lungs, right? So if we were to dissect a mammal like a cat, we would see that the thoracic cavity is separated from the abdominal cavity by a diaphragm, and that diaphragm expands the volume of the thorax, creating this negative pressure that allows air to come in. It's a very, very efficient way to bring in air into the lungs. Mammals also tend to have a highly developed sense of smell, although this is very much reduced in humans and in a few other primates. Mammals also have an upright gait for rapid, efficient locomotion. If you think about it, the reptiles have their limbs out like this, right? And so they're kind of crawling around like this. But mammals reorganize their shoulders so that the um, the limbs are not facing outward, they're kind of facing downward, and so then the mammal moves around like this, and it's a more efficient way to get around. Think of a monitor lizard or a crocodile, almost has to do a push-up and then crawl around. But if you think of a dog or a cat, they're already standing in that push-up position, so they can get around more efficiently. And like birds, mammals also have endothermy. Okay, this figure shows the evolution of major groups of synapsids. Remember back when I started talking about amniotes, I mentioned that there are some amniotes that are synapsids and some that are diapsids and some that are anapsids. Remember that the mammals are the are synapsids. Well, during the Mesozoic, which is here, remember the Mesozoic is that era that used to be called the Age of Reptiles. During the Mesozoic, there were mammals, even though it was the Age of Reptiles, there were mammals around. However, they tended to be very small, like the size of mice. And they lived almost literally in the shadow of the dinosaurs for about 150 million years. Then they greatly diversified in the Cenozoic. So the Cenozoic sometimes is called the Age of Mammals. Now, if you notice in this figure, mammals are not the only synapsids. They are the only living synapsids that are in the present, right? So we have three lineages of mammals, the marsupials. Those are the mammals that have a pouch where development continues after birth. Then there are the placental mammals, the mammals where most of development occurs in the placenta before birth. And then there are the monotremes. These are the oviparous or egg-laying mammals. However, in the past, there were other synapsid lineages that are not considered mammals. For example, the pelycosaurs that went extinct in the Permian extinction, and some other groups here that went extinct at different times in the Mesozoic. All right, let's talk about Dimetrodon. This is a really cool animal and is featured in almost all children's dinosaur books. But this is sort of a pet peeve of mine because the Dimetrodon, it's not a dinosaur. It's also not even a reptile. In fact, it's not a mammal either. And it's not a mammal-like reptile as it is described in many books. So what is Dimetrodon if it's none of these? Well, if you look at the skull of the Dimetrodon, you could see clearly that this is a synapsid animal, right? With one pair of fenestra behind the orbit of the where the eye socket would be. Okay, so this was a synapsid animal of the Permian period, that is before the Mesozoic. Okay, so even before dinosaurs. Synapsids were the earliest amniotes to diversify widely into terrestrial habitats even before the diapsids or the reptiles. Remember that dinosaurs are diapsids. But many synapsids disappeared in the Permian and Triassic mass extinctions. So that's what I had in the previous slide, right? So Dimetrodon is an example of this group of synapsids called the pelycosaurs. And you see the pelycosaurs went extinct at the end of the Permian in this mass extinction, and other synapsids went extinct at the end of the Triassic, and yet other synapsids went extinct at the end of the Jurassic. The only synapsids that made it through to the present time are the mammals. So when you see Dimetrodon, remember it's not a dinosaur, and it actually even lived before the dinosaurs. All right, let's look at this cladogram of synapsids. Remember to first look at this basal characteristic. This is the homologous feature that unites the group. They have that lateral skull opening, right? So that's what makes them all synapsids. They have the lateral skull opening. And I want you to see here, as we progress in time, we see the enlarged canine teeth, right? So that's the heterodons. You can see here that this Dimetrodon has pronounced canine teeth, but these synapsids have even larger canine teeth. Again, that heterodont condition. Also take a look at the dentary of Dimetrodon. You see the dentary of Dimetrodon is relatively small, and in future synapsids it gets larger and even larger. And then here, when we get into the modern day mammals, the characteristics that unite the mammals are hair. They have that mammary gland and other skin glands, which we will discuss in just a moment. And check this out, a dentary squamosal jaw, okay? And of course, the three ear ossicles, okay? These are the little three ear bones that we use for hearing. But I'll talk about this in just a moment, the dentary squamosal jaw articulation. Okay, check out these different skulls of synapsids. These were farther in the past, and this would be like a modern day mammal. This figure is meant to illustrate the evolution of the jaw joint and the middle ear bones in mammals and their ancestors. So in modern day mammals, there are these two tiny little bones called the incus and the malleus. These tiny ear bones are now function in audition, right? So in the sense of hearing. That's in modern day mammals. And those tiny little bones are homologous with a bone that is also found in fossil synapsids, the quadrate and the articular here in the back of the skull. In those extinct synapsids, the articular and the quadrate bones previously served as the jaw joint, but they became reduced in size to better transmit sound vibration. Okay, so for example, look at Dimetrodon, where the articular and a fairly large quadrate formed the joint where this of the jaw. Here in a cynodont, which is a synapsid that lived after Dimetrodon, we see a reduced articular and a reduced quadrate, but they still form the joint of the jaw. And then here in a later cynodont, we see the quadrate and the articular still forming the the joint of the jaw, however in reduced form. At the same time, we see a trend in the dentary becoming larger and larger. And now in modern day mammals, the jaw joint is formed by the dentary and the squamosal, not the articular and the quadrate. In fact, this new jaw joint formed by the dentary and the squamosal bones is the defining characteristic for fossil mammals. So when a paleontologist finds a skull, the paleontologist will look at the number of fenestra behind the eye socket to determine if it's a synapsid or a diapsid. If it's a synapsid, the next feature they're going to look at are what bones make up the jaw joint. If the joint is made up of the dentary and the squamosal, then you have a mammal. If the jaw joint is made up of the quadrate and the articular, then you have a more ancient synapsid. I mentioned that the Cenozoic is the age of mammals that followed the Mesozoic, the age of reptiles. So think about this. What factors contributed to the diversification of mammals in the Cenozoic? It has something to do with what I mentioned last time about dinosaurs. And there's also a second reason. It has to do about climate, but I'll let you do the reading on your own to answer this question. Another question. What factors contributed to the extinction of mammalian megafauna in the Pleistocene epoch, which is 2.6 million years to the present, so a very recent epoch? Right, I want you to think about these two questions because in the early Cenozoic, there was a great diversification of mammals, but in the late Cenozoic, meaning in the epoch closer to the present, there has been a rather large extinction of mammals, especially the larger mammals. Let's talk about the integument. The integument is that fancy scientific word meaning the skin and things that are derived from the skin. As in all vertebrates, mammalian skin is composed of a thin epidermis. You see here is a very thin layer and a thicker dermis. Here the dermis has this uh, muscular layer, it has some glands, it has a lot of nerves in there and a lot of blood vessels. So all vertebrates basically have an epidermis and a dermis. However, mammalian skin is thicker than in other classes of vertebrates, and it is keratinized in places that are subject to much wear. For example, the soles of your feet. Not just your feet, but of mammals' feet. But yeah, if you were to walk barefoot, then the soles of your feet would thicken, or if you're a rock climber or maybe a construction worker, the palms of your hand would thicken, and they would thicken with keratin, which is a tough, fibrous protein that constitutes hair, nails, claws, hooves, and horns. Let's talk about hair. Remember that hair is a characteristic of mammals, but it is reduced in humans and exists as a few sensory bristles on the snouts of cetaceans. The hair follicle is an epidermal structure, but it lies deep in the dermis. Let's see if we see that here. So remember, this is the hair follicle. It is, you see that it's actually an epidermal structure. The epidermis kind of gets embedded there in the dermis, and that's where the hair is born. It is an epidermal structure, but it lies deep, embedded deep in the dermis. And the hair grows by this rapid proliferation of cells in the follicle. And as cells continue to proliferate, the hair shaft is pushed upward and away, right out of the skin. And as it does so, the cells are pushed away from their source of nourishment. They accumulate keratin and they die. So much like feathers that are dead structures, hair is a dead structure. Mammals generally have two kinds of hair in their pelage. There is underhair that serves primarily as insulation by trapping a layer of air underneath it, and there is guard hair, which is coarser and made up of coarser and longer hairs that protect against the wear and provide coloration. So remember, when you look at a bird, what you're looking at are its contour feathers that are on the outside. Same when you look at a mammal, you're looking at its guard hairs that are on the outside and are protecting it. Now, some aquatic mammals, like beavers and otters, have a very dense underhair that does not even get wet when they swim. And their guard hairs also become wet. The guard hairs do become wet, but then they stick to each other, forming a protective layer over the underhair. So essentially, they use their hair as waterproofing. So that being said, what are some functions of hair? I just mentioned one. Can you think of some others? Perhaps by looking at some photographs of different mammals, you can think of different functions of hair. So there's camouflage for predators. There is protection from predators in the form of spines and quills. There is thermoregulation. Some hairs are used for sensing, like the bristles or the whiskers of cats. I mentioned the waterproofing function of some aquatic mammals, and sometimes hair is used for camouflage. I mentioned that here when I was talking about this leopard, but in these hairs, the camouflage only works if the color of the hair matches the background, right? So I want you to take a look at this article. You could click on the link of the PDF, or I'll also put the link on the description of this video. It's really interesting because climate change is affecting the way that some camouflage functions or fails to function in this case. So check out this neat article. Other structures that are derived from the integument are horns and antlers. True horns are found in family Bovidae. That's the cattle family. But antelopes and sheep are also members of that same family. True horns are not shed, they are not branched, and they grow continuously and occur in both sexes. For example, in this um, male and female pair of bighorn sheep, you see that both male and females have horns. Now the horn is again derived from the integument, and you see that it has this the external part of the horn is essentially keratinized epidermis, but underneath there's this layer of bone. And again, horns are not shed, as opposed to antlers. Antlers are found in the family Cervidae. There's a deer family that includes deer and caribou and moose and elk. And antlers, unlike horns, are branched. And antlers are composed of solid bone, and they occur only in males, except in caribou, where both males and females have antlers. So antlers are shed, and they're only found in males. So that means that the males have to grow this new rack of antlers every year, and then they're shed every year. Now, if that's the case, how do you think that the annual growth of antlers constrain mineral metabolism in male cervids? Think about the diet that they have to have in order to sustain this really rapid growth of antlers. The last thing I want to talk about in discussing derivatives of the integument are glands, because we have several kinds. First, there are sweat glands. These are tubular and highly coiled glands that are found over much of the body surface of mammals. Mammals are the only vertebrates that sweat. Now, sweat glands come in two flavors. Well, maybe flavors is not the right word for sweat glands, but in two types. There are the eccrine sweat glands. These produce watery sweat that draws heat away from the skin surface by evaporative cooling. So sweat glands are what's producing the sweat that's over the surface of Serena Williams. I think this is Serena Williams. Eccrine sweat glands are found in hairless regions such as foot pads in most mammals. But in other mammals, they're kind of in different places. For example, horses and primates have them all over the body. Remember, sweat glands or eccrine sweat glands are absent in other vertebrates, but not all mammals have them. For example, they tend to be reduced or absent in rodents, rabbits, and whales. The other type of sweat glands are apocrine sweat glands. These open into a hair follicle and secrete an oily sweat that produces body odors. Apocrine sweat glands develop in puberty and in humans they are restricted to certain areas, which is why body odor tends to start after a certain age in humans and only comes out of certain places of the body. I'm sure you're familiar with which ones. The other types of glands I want to discuss are scent glands. These are present in nearly all mammals. They vary in location and function across the body. For example, scent glands are found on the face, on the legs, on reproductive areas, and on the tails of different groups of mammals. They are used for communication with members of the same species by marking territory, or sometimes mammals sniff one another to get information from that scent. Many mammals use their scent glands to release strong pheromones during the mating season to attract the opposite sex. And perhaps the scent glands that are most famous or maybe infamous are those of skunks, minks, and weasels. These scent glands open into the anus and are very odoriferous when they discharge forcefully. The third type of glands that I want to mention are sebaceous glands. These produce an oily secretion that is used to lubricate the skin and the hairs. So this is what keeps our face and our hair pliable and glossy. Sebaceous glands are usually associated with hair follicles, but sometimes they're free to open directly into the skin surface. Now, most mammals have sebaceous glands over the entire body, but in humans, they are most numerous in the scalp and the face. So that's why usually our scalp and our face tend to be oily. Because of that, acne tends to be concentrated in the scalp and the face because it is that pore where when sebaceous glands are associated with a hair follicle, sometimes the follicle tends to get clogged or infected or inflamed, causing a pimple. The last gland that I want to discuss are mammary glands. Mammary glands occur in all female mammals and in rudimentary form even in male mammals. Now, unlike most mammals, monotremes, the egg-laying mammals, lack nipples and they simply secrete milk onto the fur of the mother's belly where it is lapped by the young. So in this picture you see this duckbill platypus, which is an egg-laying monotreme, and you see its little baby platypi that are just slapping up the milk on its mother's belly. There are no nipples, however, there are mammary glands, and of course, they're drinking milk. In marsupials, the mammary glands are they do have a nipple, and the young are drinking milk inside of the pouch of their mothers. And of course, in placental mammals, including humans, the mammary gland is also associated with nipples. In human females, the adipose tissue or fatty tissue accumulates around the mammary gland at puberty to form breasts. Some mammals have been domesticated by humans. Many mammals, in fact, have been selectively bred to yield characteristics desirable for human purposes. In this way, humans have essentially created a new species. For example, the dog, the species name of dog is Canis familiaris, were the first domesticated animals. They derived from gray wolves, which is a different species, Canis lupus, and this relationship started developing at least 15,000 years ago. The domestic cat is another species that was formed from the domestication of the wild cat about 9,000 years ago. And in a similar way, humans have domesticated mammals like sheep, pigs, goats, horses, camels, and llamas. And the domestication of those animals coincided with the development of agriculture around the world about 11,000 years ago. So I want to leave you with this thought because we were just talking about glands and breasts, right, surrounding the mammary glands in human females, and this is uh, has been a puzzle for me and for zoologists for well as long as there has been zoology. So think about this: why do women have full breasts? If the mammary gland is used for nourishing young, why do women have full breasts even when they're not nourishing young, and even when they are past menopause, when they cannot have any young? Perhaps an even more puzzling question is, why do men have nipples? I'll leave you with those two, and we'll discuss this next time. Until then, be strong and courageous.